our some review. So Sarah,
Hey y'all, I just wanted to include my number over here if y'all ever have any questions. I just took this class last semester, so still pretty fresh on the brain. But I'm also helping out with 3010 with pictures and stuff. So if you'd want to see like 3010 pictures and now it'd be like a muscle question, we can do that. I'm in the computer lab pretty often. I'm sure if you like walk by, I'm studying or something like that in there, so you can always come in there and like ask me something or say, hey, I need some help with the hip, and I'll show you some pictures, examples that maybe I remember from a test and or like I got kind of confused with, just things to help out. I'm here as a resource. Don't need me. Okay, heading out.
thank you, sir.
Bye, y'all.
All right, you guys, let's start on the ankle and subtalar first. So the ankle and subtalar is like an inverted skateboard. In fact, I went to Walmart at like 6 in the morning a couple weeks ago to buy a little skateboard to use in 310 class. So I'll bring it on Friday. But it's an inverted skateboard, if you remember, because we need the wheels to make us go forward and back. That's your ankle. Talocrural joint, the ankle joint. It's a uniaxial hinge. That's your wheels. A skateboard, the wheels can perpetually spin in the same direction forever. We have to rotate our wheel, lift it up, recock it, right? We have to, we can't just keep spinning or that's a bad day. In addition, just like a regular skateboard, we have wobble. We have balance, right? The skateboard, as you're riding the skateboard, you have to be able to balance your center of mass over that base of support. And that's our subtalar and transverse tarsal joints, okay? So what I want to emphasize before we go into the main muscles is that you're going to have muscles that are really powerful for propelling our skateboard, our gastroc, our soleus, these big powerful skateboard propeller muscles. And then you're going to have these little intricate, more stringy muscles that are more for your balance. So like if you're balancing on one foot, you're going to notice how you kind of invert and evert as you're kind of maintaining your center of mass over your base support. You don't need your big calf muscles for that. You need the inversion everter muscles. And these muscles are also important for stabilization. You have, these are crumbs of, so you're going to see some of these inverter and everter muscles, and you're like, well, they don't look very powerful. And it's like, well, it's not that they're propelling your skateboard, but they're there for your balance and also to help stabilize all these different tarsal bones and all these. So you need these muscles to kind of, in fact, one of the muscles I'm going to talk about, the tibialis posterior, is very important for like arch support. So there are muscles that cross the ankle that are there to kind of help maintain stability. Muscles role is more than just spinning the skateboard. Stability of joints and also for balance. You remember in the levers, balance, like third class, one on one side of the teeter-totter and the other side of the teeter-totter. So inverters and everters are going to really help when we're balancing. And then our gastroc and soleus are big wheel skateboard propelling muscles. Okay. So that's why I wanted to kind of give you a kind of heads up that we have these big, powerful plantar flexor muscles, but we also have more kind of little intricate muscles that are going to cross that foot, and they're there for balance and for other things, like when you're walking, when you heel strike, you need dorsiflexors to kind of transition between heel strike, foot flatted, toe off. You don't want that to happen too fast or too slow. You have to control the speed of that plantar flexion through those dorsiflexors eccentrically. Some of you that work in clinics, some people might have what they call a drop foot, where they can't control those dorsiflexors. So when the heel strike, the foot just kind of flops on the ground. So there's all these different roles outside of just propulsion. All right. I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to mix it up because I think we've done it enough where I'm going to give you the so what, here are the muscles you're responsible for. Here's how they look in the circle, and then we'll go to the PowerPoint. Okay? And there's a reason for this. Here are your muscles that you're going to be responsible for at the ankle and subtalar joint. We're going to learn these two joints together because although they're separate articulations, they live in the same apartment complex. And what I mean by that is they're in the same capsule. When you have a joint capsule, it's kind of like a water balloon with engines have oil to help reduce friction. You have this capsule, this water balloon about the ankle and subtalar joint, and you fill it with synovial fluid to try to help reduce friction. So it's the same apartment. It's just the ankle is on the top floor and the subtalar joint is on the bottom floor. Subtalar, below the talus. There's your talus, and that's what articulates with the distal tibia and the distal fibula. There's your wheel, and underneath it is the wobble. So again, it's an inverted skateboard. Skateboard, the wheel's on the bottom and the wobble's on top. For our ankles, the wheel is on the top and the wobble is on the bottom. Okay. Do you guys remember the tricky questions on 10 where I would give you like inversion and eversion and you had to remember that that was an ankle, right? Spraining your ankle, we've heard it 1,000 times. High ankle is ankle. There's nothing high about it. That's ankle. And sprain underneath is the subtalar and transverse dorsal. And it could be a number of different sprains. Like it could be a sprain of, the anterior talar fibula. It could be different dorsal bones. So low ankle is really subtalar and high ankle is really ankle. If you remember. Fresh. What I love about the ankle and subtalar, very descriptive. So the tibialis anterior muscle on your tibia that's in the front. And I'll show you how it crosses to understand full. Hallux is a word for big toe. Hallux we're going to get when we do upper extremity is thumb. So you have big toe pulling muscles that are very independent to the big toe. If anybody's ever heard anything about getting toe off, it's not toes off, it's toe off because you end with that big toe. There's a lot of force on that big toe, so it gets its own flexor and extensor puller. Then we have our digits, the others, 2 through 4. We're going to have muscles that go to them to flex and extend pull, and they cross the ankle and subtalar to get there. We're going to talk about the family of peroni, the peroneals, longus brevis and tertius, tibialis posterior, muscle in the posterior tibia. We have extensor hallux, big toe. We're going to have flexor hallux. We have extensor digits. We're going to have flexor digits. There's our peroneal muscles we're going to talk about. And then our major propellers of, not helicopter propeller, but like to propel the skateboard, our gastroc and soleus. So again, that's how I want you to kind of visualize this, that our gastroc and soleus are going to be very important for making our skateboard go. But those other muscles, in addition to making us go, are going to have other secondary functions to help keep our skateboard balanced while we move along. In addition, Friday, I'm hoping it's going to be a very fun lecture because I'm going to go into a little bit of the biomechanics of cramping. Cramping of the calf and lower extremity, and we'll talk about the physiology and the biomechanics of cramping. And a lot of it has to do with biarticular muscles being on slack, which is going to be, I think, fun. Biarticular muscles being on slack. So here is your right ankle and subtalar joint circle. Very important to differentiate. This is not an intersection. This is not like the intersection of Johnston and St. Mary. This is an overpass. This is an overpass. The ankle joint is on top of the subtalar and transverse dorsal joints. Does that make sense? So if you're looking at an overpass, it may look like the roads are intersecting, but one is going on top of the other. The reason we combine it into one circle is darn near all of these muscles work at the subtalar medial lateral and the ankle anterior posterior. So it would be redundant with having so many muscles that pull in both joints. So we have it collapsed, but we communicate, look guys, bilateral axis, that's ankle, that's your wheel. Mostly anterior posterior axis, that's your wobble. That's your subtalar. Cool? And the polar axis in this case is not applicable unless you have a bad day. In fact, when people sprain their ankle, their true ankle joint, that's because they have torsion. Someone lands on their foot and there's transverse torque in an articulation that doesn't allow transverse motion. Does that make sense? So in essence, when you do this, that talus is going to bow out or pop out that fibula from the tibia. And that's what a high ankle sprain is. It's transverse plane motion when you're not supposed to transverse plane rotate. Or, as I taught you guys scientifically, a bad day. And we'll get into more injury stuff, fun stuff on this. So, posterior to the bilateral, these are going to be your plantar flexors. Makes sense because it takes kind of more energy to propel you going forward. We're going to have dorsiflexors anterior. These are very important for transitioning from heel strike to foot flat because those muscles have to work eccentrically to allow the plantar flexion on their time. It's about timing. You don't want it to go too fast and you don't want it to go too slow. So dorsiflexors are going to be anterior to the bilateral. The medial crossing muscles, those are going to be our inversion pullers. Our lateral crossing muscles are going to be our eversion pullers. So combinations, these are anterolaterals. These are going to be our dorsiflexor everters. Posterolateral crossing muscles, our plantar flexion everters. Posteromedials, our plantar flexion inverters. Anteromedial, our dorsiflexion inverters. Big, powerful skateboard propellers, just posterior and anatomical, neither medial nor lateral. They're just, they're pushing our wheels. Those are propulsion muscles. Big, powerful. So basically, this is saying the exact same thing as this. Tibialis anterior. By now, hopefully, you could be like, well, I don't even know what that muscle is, but I know how it has to pull because I can see how it crosses. Tibialis anterior, dorsiflexion inverter. Go up to your list, tibialis anterior, ankle dorsiflexor, subtalar inverter. We are going to abbreviate instead of saying subtalar and transverse dorsal joints. Just going to say subtalar and infer the transverse dorsals, all those other dorsal bones. Any questions about the layout of the circle or make sense? Dorsi, plantars, inverters, everters, two separate joints. Tibialis anterior. So the tibialis anterior is an anterior muscle of the tibia. It crosses anterior to the ankle joint, so it's going to be a dorsiflexion puller, but it also crosses medial to your subtalar joint. Crosses. This muscle actually starts off laterally. If you dorsiflex, you're going to kind of that meaty kind of anterior muscle that you feel, that's your tibialis anterior. So again, it's not about where this muscle starts, it's how does it cross. So because it crosses medial, that's why it's going to pull in even though the muscle starts out. Okay? You have this on Moodle, but let me press so dorsiflexion pull, because it crosses anterior. There's our tibialis anterior. Does not cross the knee. Only one muscle is going to cross the knee. That's our big gastroc. Okay, and here's our subtalar inversion. Make sense? totally forgot that I made this slide. I think it's cool. So all of our circles are kind of a symmetrical, you know, middle of the circle, but this is really what the circle is breaking down, right? There's our ankle joint. And then our AP kind of runs in between our first and seconds. So the medial crossings are going to be inverters. No, I forgot I made that slide. I'll try to help explain what's happening. So there's our tibialis anterior crossing anteromedial. Does that make sense? Pulling that foot in the direction of dorsi and inversion. Tibialis anterior, if people start walking for the first time, they may feel like soreness or ischemia or pain in the front shin. This is one of those muscles. Your plantar flexors, very tonic. They're very fatigue resistant because you use your wheel pushers all the time. When you start walking more, though, your dorsiflexors are working abnormally hard, again, to transition between heel strike and foot flat. So the dorsiflexors are actually very fatiguable. So the dorsiflexors are like, hey, plantar flexors, you guys work all the time. I'm just kind of getting, so that's why kind of your front shin muscles are typically kind of sweating it out a little bit when you start exercising. They're very fatiguable. All right. Again, we have Preston. Our adductor muscles. Doesn't mean they can't abduct when they're working eccentrically, right? They get their name because of how they pull. So you have an extensor, big toe, long tendon. Longus and brevis. Brevis is short. It's not about the muscle length. It's about tendon length. So actually a longus muscle is actually going to have a short muscle belly relative to a very long tendon. So brevis and tendon or brevis and longus are tendon related to their descriptors. So extensor hallucis, a muscle that pulls in the direction of big toe extension. That's all that means. Now you're like, well, a big toe extensor, how does that influence ankle and subtalar? Well, to get to the big toe, it crosses the ankle and it crosses medial. Remember, the AP axis is going to be in between the first and second toe from this picture here that's in your PDF. Look at that. AP axis is going to run between your first and second toe. Okay. So to get there, we got to cross the ankle in the front. Guys, think of it like this. If I had a string that attached to my first, this is my first, but it is just harder to explain it. But if I had a string that attached to my thumb and I crossed my wrist and then I crossed my elbow and then I pulled, it would pull here, it would pull there, and it would pull here. I think the middle finger would be easier. String, pull, pull, pull. And if the string crossed my shoulder, it would pull boom, 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 and boom, right? Whatever it crosses to get there, it's going to pull at that joint. That's called an extrinsic muscle. You do have some little intrinsics that just pull on the individual interphalangeals. Congratulations, that's graduate school stuff. You'll learn that in graduate school if you have to. These are just the big ones, the major ones that are allowing us to use our skating. So our extensor, big toe longus, extensor, hallucis longus, an anteromedial crossing muscle, dorsiflexor, invert. Cool? All right. This is fun. Let's go to the digits. Your big toe on your foot, very important again for toe off. Obviously, your foot doesn't have the dexterity that your hands do, right? It's more again for propulsion and getting you around places. So you're going to have a lot more little intricate little intrinsic muscles of the hand than you do the foot. Your toes have this muscle that runs along your fibula, crosses the ankle anterolateral in the front and on the outside, and then fans off like almost kind of like Spider-Man shooting a web into toes 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in other words, if I grabbed onto this string and I pull, it's going to pull on all those toes at once. Does that make sense? That's the anterior cross, and then this is the lateral cross.
So when it moves and it goes flexion, it moves your mental also. It's not just
The digits are just 2 through 5. So your big toe has its own puller. Your big toe has its own independent puller. Just kind of like how your thumb has some, well, you have some specialized muscles too, but your big toe has its own tendon on the flexion pull and the extension pull. And then 2 through 5 have a shared. Each string goes to each individual digit, but the muscle that's yanking on that string is shared. So it's like, so the muscle, the tendons split, and they pull on all 4, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is a pretty good view of it. So 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let me go to our PDF, maybe a visual picture feed. There we go. So extensor digitorum longus. So you have one muscle. There's the tendon, and then that tendon splits 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if I was going to pull on that muscle, it would pull on all 4 of those digits.
Can you really pull on what you can call it out for the big toe?
It's,
Unless you were actually forced
you,
muscle?
God, what a great question. A lot of times we're so used to movement patterns that it's hard for us to independently do it. But a friend of mine who's a nurse anesthetist, they can do nerve blocks. They could block my big toe, and 100% you could just move here. It's like you can do it, especially if like you consciously try to flex your big toe while you're extending your other digits. You could do it like almost kind of like a force couple action there. So you can do it. It's just a lot of times when you're doing kind of movement patterns, it's almost like when I'm trying to internally rotate my knee, my subtalar joint wants to invert because I'm just so used to kind of that movement pattern of bringing it in. But they're 100% separately innervated muscles. I think the best way to do it is try to flex your big toe. I'm doing it right now. Flex your big toe while you extend your digits. I don't know if you can see that. So they don't have to all come up. When you're walking though, and as you're eccentrically plantar flexing, all those toes are going to be pushing on your toe box. So that's kind of how they help with that eccentric plantar flexion, because they're pushing on that toe box. And that's why there's a difference in gait with sandals versus shoes. Because when you're in flip flops, you don't have anything those digits don't have anything to push on. It's kind of fun. Yeah, not easy to do, but you can independently do them. So this is a visual picture of your hallux, your big toe. Look at the difference. I mean, again, that big toe kind of has its own sauce. 2 separately innervating muscles. One goes, I'm sorry, the purple is our hallux. Goes to the big toe, and then our digits, Spider-Man. These would be our little intrinsics up in there. Where's our big tibialis anterior? Great question. All right, guys, you have a family of peroneals. Two of them are what we call sister muscles. They have the exact same functions at the joints. Two separate muscles because stabilizing wise, they're going to go and insert, they're going to cross more places, so they're going to kind of help with stability and help our teeter-totter, but they have the same function. This is the cousin. The peroneus tertius or tertius is a cousin in that it has the same frontal plane pull. It's an everter, but the tertius crosses the ankle anterior, where the longus and brevis, as we're going to see in a second, cross the ankle posterior. So the peroneus tertius is a ankle dorsiflexor because of this, as it crosses in the front. Yoink. And it's an eversion puller because it crosses lateral. And yoink. How would it look on our circle? So we have our tibialis anterior, dorsi inverter, extensor big toe, dorsi inverter, extensor digit, dorsi everter, and then there's our last dorsiflexor, peroneus tertius, dorsi everter. Let's look at a picture. So our tibialis anterior. Again, origin insertion will be important for some of them, but what does it do is going to be important for all of them. And what does it do is a function of how does it cross. So our extensor big toe, anteromedial. So let's follow with anteromedial. And again, it's not where it starts. Look, that muscle's on the outside. But how does it cross? It crosses medially. So that's why it's a medial pulling muscle. Crosses anterior, that's why it's an anterior pulling muscle. So anteromedial, another anteromedial, there's our AP axis in between our first and second digits. Extensor digit, this is an anterolateral. Look, I love this picture. This shows the difference between our big toe by itself and the digits. This would be where the AP axis runs to the subtalar. Inversion puller, eversion puller. And then here's our tertius. Anterolateral. Cool. And again, what I like about the PowerPoints with the pictures, some people may be just more pictorial visual. Some people may be more motion visual. So you have both options or a combination of both. And the circles just summarize. Circles just summarize, guys, because sometimes it's not easy. Look, this is really tough to kind of, well, is this medial or lateral? So the circles just help us to summarize definitively medials, laterals, anteriors, posteriors. Sometimes it's not easy to see with a three-dimensional concept in a two-dimensional picture. All right, let's get to our other peroneals, our other cousins, longus and brevis. Once again, longus is not a long muscle. It's actually a long tendon. So the peroneus longus there's our longus, long tendon. So again, it inserting, God, I love this. Look at where it inserts. And again, I'm not going to ask you on the test, I'm trying to show you function. It actually inserts on the inside of the foot. Right? This is the big toe. This is underneath. This is like looking at the bottom of our foot. It actually inserts on the base of the big toe. But to get there, it crosses lateral. The function is all about how it crosses. It could do a loop-de-loop and spin itself 10 times, and it doesn't matter. It's how does it cross. So to get to the big toe on the bottom, look, it has to cross laterally, posterolateral. Longus, long tendon, brevis, short tendon. Look at that short tendon. Athletic trainers, this is when you have an inversion sprain, and especially in youth, where the ligaments and the tendons are stronger than the bones sometimes that haven't fused yet. You could have what they call a Jones fracture. Fracture right there at the base of the fifth metatarsal. So peroneus longus and brevis. Look at that. Turns into a tendon late. That's why we say short tendon turns into a tendon early, long tendon. So again, you look at these muscles and you're like, that doesn't seem very powerful. Guys, you don't have to have powerful muscles to balance. Like, it doesn't take, it just takes a little bit, a little wobble. But in addition, these muscles, remember how we talked about like the erector spinae helping to dissipate some of that work throughout so that not one muscle has to keep you upright all day long, right? Fatigue resistant. So having a bunch of plantar flexors kind of makes sense because you get to kind of chop up some of that work. I mean, we spend a lot of energy propelling our skateboard forward. In addition, all those muscles that cross both the ankle and subtalar are helping to maintain stability of those tarsal bones as well. Muscles aren't just there for motion. All right, so let's look at how our peroneals, the cousins, look, here's our cousins. We have the longus and the brevis, which are sister, we call them sister muscles because they have the exact same function. They're closer related because they cross in the same way in two different joints. And then the cousin tertius, who has the same lateral pull, but has a different anterior posterior. Well, I think it should get easier from here. We're going to save the ankle propulsion muscles, gastroc and soleus, for the end. All we have is a posteromedial quadrant. We had an extensor big toe. We got to have a flexor big toe. We had extensor digit. We're going to have flexor digits. And we had a tibialis anterior. We're going to have a tibialis posterior. The tibialis posterior crosses posterior, tibialis posterior. So the posterior pull makes it a plantar flexor. And the medial pull is what makes it an inverter. Now these are, it looks like it's moving and it is examples, right? Like open chain looks like it's moving and it is. When you're balancing or weight bearing, remember the inversion and the eversion are more kind of subtle for that wobble. The tibialis posterior, you guys are going to learn in therapy, this inversion pull, very important for arch support, muscular arch support. You have other things that help your arches, your plantar fascia helps. It's like the bowstring on the bow, the way your tarsal bones, like you think about arch architecture, where you have a key bone and then you have other stones, the keystone and those other other stones kind of right, so that they can lean on each other and dissipate the force. That's what your tarsals are. You have your key bone right here, your navicular, and these tarsal bones kind of help create this arch so that you can dissipate force. You have your plantar fascia, the bowstring of the bow. You have ligaments, spring ligament, but you have muscles. So in therapy and rehab, someone's flat-footed. I'm not saying you can't make them into having a high arch, but there's exercises that you can learn to do to help those muscles stabilize more. And this is an example of one of tibialis posterior is a really big one for arch support, muscularly. Tibialis posterior. Yeah.
So KNES
That's tough. You can help them. So So the question is a continuum. Can I, if I'm on, if I'm on a continuum, I'm on a spectrum of speed. I was a sprinter in high school. That doesn't mean I was super fast. I went to a small school. We didn't have anybody else to sprint. I cannot train, I'm limited to my genetic capabilities, right? I can't train like Rocky Balboa and race Usain Bolt, the fastest human ever alive. I can improve, I can get faster, but I can only get faster relative to my genetic capabilities, right? So to clarify your point, you can improve someone's arches, but you can't make them into a pes cavus like person, because there's other factors in that pie, right? Muscular innervation is one of those factors, but your plantar fascia, natural, tendency, your bone structure, there's other factors that are in that pie. So I want to clarify, you can improve it. 100% you can improve it, but you can't like skip the line to have like, a high arch if you were naturally flat-footed, but you can improve. You can improve. Absolutely, you can improve. You can always improve. And I think that's important. Like, we shouldn't set unrealistic expectations, not only for athletes, but in rehab as well. Like, we're going to improve you. But I don't want someone to think that, like if I, practice hard enough, I could be the next Shohei Ohtani, right? Shohei Ohtani is like 6'4" and built like a gazelle and also works hard. So what a great question. We can 100% improve. Yeah.
So that's that. Well, I'm that cookies.
Me too. Are you a sprinter?
No.
Typically, not all the time, but sprinters tend to be more flat-footed, and cross-country distance people tend to be more arch-footed.
But I wanted to ask, like, does that mean that my inverters are typically?
Your inverters are typically weak. Because what happens, let me see if I could, and first of all, I love these kind of questions, guys. This is what teaching is about, is interacting on things that you're interested in. So if I was flat-footed, I would actually have this illusion of eversion. If I'm arched-footed, I would have this illusion of inversion, eversion, inversion, right? So when I'm here and I have an arched foot, I'm more inverted. Now, you have these subtle motions that we haven't talked about. Pronation, supination, reversion, anteversion. That's how different tarsal bones can kind of glide or shift about themselves. We're looking at it holistically. Remember, like it was like in Nemo, where all the fish go down, all the fish come up. So we kind of looked at it as all of the tarsal bones gliding one way, all of the tarsal bones gliding the other. But when you have a higher arch, you have inversion, and when you have a flat foot, you have more eversion. And that's one reason why flat-footed people in World War II were either not enlisted as infantry, or you took desk jobs, because flat-footed people, because they didn't have the better dissipation of force, they were wearing those army boots, and they would get stress fractures and have lower leg injuries because they didn't have that natural dissipation of arms. So flat-footed people were having trouble marching and jogging and doing other things. Now, flat-footed people typically are good sprinters, because when you're sprinting, you don't need the recoil of the arch. Like, you actually want a firm. You want to be able to transfer as much force as you can in a small amount of time. So you actually don't want a spring effect. You actually want a very rigid link. In fact, some of the sprinters now have like very special insoles that are super rigid, because you're trying to transfer force with no wasted time. Did that answer your question? So like when we're flat, we're more E, and when we're arched, we're more in. Or again, they have pronated, supinated, pronation, supination, two different forms of the same.
So following up on what.
Yeah.
If you're flat-footed and you're constantly inverting, that's gonna cause the inversion muscles to be stretched and let's make them weak.
If you're flat-footed, you actually need to strengthen your inversion muscles. those inverters, specifically your tibialis posterior, is fatigable and not strong enough to be able to maintain that arch. So your inverter, specifically your tibialis posterior, is not doing its job.
If I shoot those the way like that's rigid, it's supposed to give you arch, or give you like unfair advantage in the sport that you're between side spring.
Yeah, I think all equipment, depending on the sport, can give you an advantage. I think it's up to the governing body to say, when is enough enough? I'll give you an example of that. In swimming, the suits were so, like they were literally making swimsuits that were like, sharks were like, I'm jealous of that. Like it was so drag resistant that people were breaking records by like an abnormal amount. It couldn't have been the physiology. It had to be the equipment, right? So sometimes the equipment in competitive stuff can get too good. Sometimes it can get unsafe. Like it's too good for your own good. Like in NASCAR, they can make those cars go 1,000 miles if they want to. Probably wouldn't you say so? They have restrictor plates to try to say within the turf is a good example of that too. Like they could make turf, well, they used to make turf that was more hard. People were blowing their knees out more, concussions hitting the turf. So they're like, we got to make field turf. We got to make it looser so that we don't have as much injury. So sometimes you have that trade-off of performance, versus injury. But something to take note of though, and I think this is important for those of you that are gonna be working with people. If I give a natural arch support, then I'm taking away that muscle doing that job. Does that make sense? Absolutely. Why does that muscle have to do the job of creating an arch when you're just going to give me an arch? Now, what I'm not saying is we shouldn't wear arch supports. I'm just saying being aware that sometimes when you give and you don't require those muscles to do that job, they're just going to be like, well, yes, you're just going to make it more weak. And so there may be a time where you don't have those shoes or you don't have those arch supports, and that muscle really going to be at a disadvantage because that muscle is going to be like, oh, now you need me. Well, I haven't been training this whole time, so guess what? You're going to hurt. So I think just like anything else, when I was an athletic trainer, we would supplement, but we would also rehab so that one day you don't need the supplement, right? And I don't mean supplements like pills, like we're going to get you through, but we're also going to work on the muscles at the same time so that one day you may not need it or you may not need it as much. Great questions, guys. This is my favorite day for class for this semester. All right, the last one for today, since we had, again, mirror effect. Oh, my athletic trainers are people that were maybe in some other class. You ever heard of the Tom, Dick, and Harry? It's an acronym to remember the postural medium quadrant. And Tom, Dick, and Harry just means Tom, tibialis posterior, Dick is flexor digitorum longus, and Harry is flexor hallucis longus. And the "and" actually means artery and then nerve. So yeah, your posterior tibial artery nerve. So Tom, Dick, and Harry live in the posterior medium quadrant. So the last one for the day are flexor digits. So this is how they cross posteriorly, pulling in the direction of plantar. And again, it's a mirror effect, guys. Just like your extensor digits went 2 through 5, your flexor digits are also going to go 2 through 5. You do have, when we get into the muscles of the wrist and the hand, you're going to have independent, they call them like flexor and extensor, like indices, digiti, minimi. You have like specialized, but that's because of the dexterity that you need to do here. These are like, your foot muscles are more for propulsion, not for dexterity. You know, you're not going to be painting with your toe muscles. Like they're more like strictly like caveman, propulsion stuff. So you're going to have different dexterity things at the fingers that you don't need in the foot or the toes. that's your big toe. There we go. See, over there, big toe. How many of them have you ever heard of turf toe? Okay, so a turf toe isn't necessarily an injury to that big toe. It's a sprain of that first toe joint, that metacarpophalangeal joint. But the point is that that's where it hurts, is just the toe off, because you have a lot of force that's leaving on that big toe. That's why that big toe is so prominent. So as you transition between heel strike, foot flat, and then toe off, it makes sense that like your little toe, it's like, again, the hand doesn't really give an example, but the little toe, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then your big toe's usually up here. So when you go off the ground, it makes sense. This is going to come off the ground first, then this, then this, then this, and the last thing to leave the ground is your big toe, because it's the furthest thing in the front.
What happens
Loses their big toe, they're going to have to relearn. They're going to have a different gait. So what they're going to probably do is toes off, because you won't be able to go as much medial. So you're going to have to leave the ground here, which is going to put more stress on a different part of the foot. Obviously it's not a life-saving thing, but they probably will be more prone to other chronic lower leg problems, just because the foot is not designed to toes off. You know, you're going to have different pressures put in different places, and that's what's so important about the growing area prosthetics and orthotics, is to try to put something there that at least can mimic your natural gait, so that you don't have abnormal stresses placed on structures that are not prepared to have those abnormal stresses placed on them.
So you can't just throw the muscles in?
Say that again?
So you can't just throw the muscles?
You can. I'm not saying that you can at all, but just if we don't have our big toe, that means we have to shift our centers of pressure. We have to change our wobble on our skateboard. That's all I'm saying. So like, instead of the skateboard wobbling normally here, if I remove part of the skateboard, like my wobble, like my natural wobble may be on a part of the skateboard that's not designed to handle that wobble. I just made up a word. So it's not that you can't do it. It's just you may have to learn a new way to walk. I'll give you an example. I had a lot of sprains when I was playing ball back in the day, and at my age, I started to get foot pain. So I go to a podiatrist. Podiatrist, a foot doctor, an ortho foot doctor, biomechanist, love foot podiatrist. And so he diagnosed me with an unstable cuboid bone, a tarsal bone in the lateral part of my foot. Ironically enough, that cuboid injury coincided with hip pain at the same time. And he was like, yeah, dude, your hip's compensating for the change of your gait pressure on your foot that's injured. So in other words, my right hip would have normally been fine, but because I'm not gating the same way because of an injury to my foot, my right hip is compensating. So it's just things you have to look for, right? Like if somebody doesn't have their big toe and they're learning to walk differently, like you may need to help them shorten their strides, or you may need to help them learn to shift weight on the non-injured part so that it kind of more mimics. Does that make sense? Like, just things you just have to be aware of, because our structures were meant or designed or made to dissipate force certain ways. And when you mess with that, you're asking certain structures to do things that maybe they're not necessarily organically made for. So again, I'm not saying you can't, 100% you can, but you just have to look out for secondary injuries, problems, discomforts that you may have to adjust. That's all. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, 100%. Those other muscles would hypertrophy and grow to compensate. Guys, great class, man. We'll see you on Friday.